Hello, everyone, and welcome back to This Day in History, our nightly look back at a specific day in history where we take a look at the events of the day and the historical consequences of the events that took place on that day. And without any further ado, let's take a look back at January the 30th. And on this day, in 1835, there was the first presidential assassination attempt in American history. Richard Lawrence attempted to assassinate President Andrew Jackson in the Capitol. Jackson was visiting the Capitol for a funeral, and as he was leaving, Lawrence attempted to fire a gun at the president, and it misfired. Jackson, visibly angry, proceeded to beat Lawrence with his walking stick. A second gun that Lawrence was carrying also misfired. Historians at the Smithsonian have taken the guns since that are in their collection and fired them without any problem. They have concluded that Lawrence was likely mentally unstable and had no connection to Jackson's political rivals, but Jackson was convinced that this was done by his rivals. Vice President Martin Van Buren was also convinced of a conspiracy, and he would never visit the Senate again without carrying two loaded pistols. Some births that occurred on this day. In 1941, in Lincoln, Nebraska, Dick Cheney was born. Dick Cheney was a member of the House. Prior to that, he was White House Chief of Staff for Gerald Ford. He was a member of the House of Representatives. He eventually made it up to Minority Whip. He was the Defense Secretary for President George H.W. Bush. He was a CEO at Halliburton Corporation. And then he served as President George W. Bush's vice president. And it was in this role that he really came to national prominence as the most powerful vice president in modern history. Cheney really changed the role of vice president in an enormous way and made the office incredibly powerful. He had an office not only in the Senate, which is tradition, but he also had an office on the House side of the Capitol, which was a first. He was an extremely, as I've said, powerful vice president. Was involved in a lot of big decisions. On 9/11, when the White House was having trouble communicating with Air Force One, with President Bush, he gave the order from the White House to shoot, that if need be, to shoot down more aircrafts. Cheney is a controversial figure, for sure. He left office incredibly unpopular and was incredibly unpopular during the whole administration. But Cheney, as I said, was an extremely powerful vice president and really changed that role. Some deaths that occurred on this day. In 1948, Orville Wright died, and of course he and his brother Wilbur founded the Orville Flight Company. He was 76 when he died on this day in Dayton in 1948. He was actually the first person to pilot an aircraft that flew by power, and he did that in 1903, and it was a short flight, but he was the actual man at the controls on the day of the first flight. I will see you all tomorrow. Y'all have a good night.